thing, because just before I came to the meeting, I got an email from the State Attorney General, and there's this vote that's happening, I think, tomorrow. So they can, because Oregon doesn't have laws against those national lenders, and they're trying to change that. Is that gonna familiar with that situation?
I am vaguely familiar with the legislation. Are you talking about the restrictions on who can talk to people about loan modifications?
No, this is so that the State Attorney General's office can go after these national lenders that apparently are untouchable in the state of Oregon right now.
I'm not familiar with the legislation.
Okay, I can help you with some of those. Forensic audits are basically APR audits. What they're doing is they're going in and pulling all the loan documentations, and they're looking for a misrepresentation by the lender where they can basically turn it around and say, you know, it's all your fault. You guys disclosed incorrectly. My client would have never had this terrible tragedy if you guys had actually disclosed accurately. So these forensic audits are looking primarily for problems with APRs, which are highly likely when you get into complicated loans, some of the subprime loans, but certainly things like negatively amortizing loans. So when you talk about their high success rate, it's a high success rate of the transactions they take on, because they look at them on the front end and make a determination, do we think we even have anything to go after? But if they think that they can find an APR, primarily an annual percentage rate, a miscalculation, then they're coming back legal department to legal department. The normal 800 people that everyone's dealing with in a normal loan modification out the window. And not only are those loan modifications happening when they are finding them, those loan modifications have a tendency to be to principal balance rather than just to interest rate. And that's really, really interesting. And I have read that there are attorney generals around the country in different states that are getting fed up with a lot of nonsense that's going on and starting to put state laws in place to make people do things, especially in the loan modification world, the way they want things done. So I hope that helped. It's an APR issue though. If you've got a normal Fannie Mae 30-year fixed, I think the likelihood of an APR miscalculation is low. Questions?
Can I add one thing to that?
Please.
I've actually been contacted by a company hired by a couple of different MI that are doing audits after short sale. The short sale paid out on their policy or whatever the investor and the MI company, and they're looking into whether the information on the borrower's side or the lender's side is incorrect, whether they're going to renege on their insurance policy.
Okay, so that makes sense.
A couple of different
The MI is a whole different entity. They don't care who's wrong. Somebody please be wrong so we don't have to pay.
Exactly.
Right, okay, I get that. Now, there was some, this gal over here in the red.
I'm assuming the lender is the one that makes the fair market value on a 1099. What happens if you disagree with that fair market value?
Well, in cases we've worked with, we first contact the lender and ask if we can talk with them, and if there's an egregious problem, change it, reissue the 1099. We haven't had much success. So again, keep in mind that 1099 comes to the client, and a copy goes to the IRS. So what we will do with those will be to actually report a different amount on the tax return, but disclose the rationale, the reason. We'll show the 1099 amount, an adjustment to an appropriate amount, and actually attach to that the reasoning and the rationale.
There's another gentleman in the back, right behind you.
Hi. At what point does a homeowner have to stay in their home in the pre-foreclosure process in order for it to qualify as their primary residence? I think Phil Quirin said that they had to stay until the notice of default was filed, but he was not clear on that. So could you clarify that for me?
Well, the law just states that it has to be the primary residence at the time the foreclosure is commenced. There is, the vast majority of practitioners in this area, including myself, believe that that means the recording of the notice of default and election to sell. There's a small minority of people out there that think because the loan can be reinstated just by being cured up until 5 days before the date set for sale, that there is at least a commencement argument that you almost have to be there until the property is sold. Now the reality, so that's the black letter of the law. The reality is that in my personal experience, the lenders, particularly on the Fannie Mae loans, don't care who's in that house. They don't care if there's tenants. They probably know that it's a tenant-occupied home, and they are still going to use the non-judicial process, which once House Bill 3656 gets signed, it won't matter if it's the primary residence or investment property.
And that has to do with the 1099 filing and the forgiveness of the taxes that may be due for that being your primary residence.
On the tax side of that, the period for which you have to occupy the residence does not apply for the mortgage forgiveness. But it does have to be your primary residence. And if you move out for a brief period because of the action and the foreclosure action, you cannot, after that period of time, you cannot rent it to abate your carrying costs. But in general, you don't have a residence time period. It does have to be your primary residence at the time of that foreclosure action.
If I understood correctly, you said that there's a possibility that a judgment on this, thanks. If I understood correctly, you said there was a possibility that a judgment on the second could extend for a 5-year period and then potentially a 10-year period. Is there does that accrue interest and penalties during that period of time?
A judgment, once the money judgment is entered, it's going to specify the post-judgment interest rate, which will usually be the contract rate. If it's the statutory rate, it's 9%. And so it will continue to accrue interest at the rate of whatever the post-judgment interest rate is. And the period is that the judgment is good for 10 years from the date of entry and can be renewed for an additional 10 years.
20 years, it could be extending that as interest and penalty.
Yeah.
Thank you.
20 years, that's a really good reason to make sure that your sellers knew that there could be potential liability or ongoing tax consequences, in an addendum.